She grew up in foster care and swore she would never go back. But then everything changed. This story is about redemption and what happens when the very place you tried to leave behind becomes the place where your purpose begins. This is Dallas from Dallas. Open hearts, endless motivation. This is Dallas Podcast. I am so honored to welcome Christie Werts into the studio. Welcome, Christie. I'm so honored to have you.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me today.
Yes. So obviously, you have had a lot of people want to know your story. You have obviously gone viral. You've been interviewed by several people in the past, but you have recently written a book, which I have right here, and it is an amazing book. I tell you, you can't put it down because there's so much detail. You have 79 stories in this book. They're not really chapters, they're more stories about your life and the story of your adoption with Levi. So, I think the best place to start is, how did you get the name Life's Sad Story, God's Love Story?
You know what's funny is when I decided to write the book, I had that title in my head. Like, that was the first thing I had, how I was going to outline my book, what exactly I was going to write. That was still in the air. But I felt like if I was to tell my story and our story, that the things that I had gone through my past, like, there's so many, as you've read in the book, there's so many sad stories, like even, from beginning to the middle and how I tie it in. But I realized that my life, even with all these sad stories, was really like a love story with God the entire time. That even despite suffering, there was always redemption and grace, just available to me whenever I needed it. And I just felt like everything has just been a sad story, but somehow it's turned into this big love story. And love story, not just, between me and God, but a love story between me and this little boy that God was preparing me for.
Yes, absolutely. Sweet Levi, his story and how your story intertwine, being obviously, born, having, going through life, kind of, thinking you were a part of a family with your mom and your dad, and then your mom leaving at 2 years old. Is kind of where you start the book. Can you kind of walk us through like your first memories of childhood and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, so my parents met like in the 70s, and they met on a bus, and I think things went kind of quickly with them. My mom was really young. I mean, I think she was 19. She was probably about 20 when she met him, which, a lot of people back in the 70s probably already had a family started, and things were a little different back then. But, she had always had her own struggles that I didn't find out till after she had passed. But looking back at them now, she had, a lot of struggles mentally, and just the desires that she wanted didn't align up with really being a mother. So I know that she stayed home with my brother and I. I have a brother that's about almost 2 years younger than me. And, my dad worked. They didn't have a lot of money. She wasn't happy that they didn't have a lot of money. And she had a hard time raising two kids. And so she had asked my dad one day, like, can we put him in daycare? I'm just having a hard time with the kids, being with the kids all day. Really, she just wanted to sit around and watch TV and not have responsibility. But, my dad agreed to it. And so I'm not exactly sure how long we were in daycare. I don't think it was very long. But I think it was just the beginning of a plot. I think she planned to leave. I don't know what was going through her mind during that time, but I just do know that just one day she packed up her stuff and just left us in a daycare. And my dad came home, and all of her things were gone and our things were still there. And I don't think my dad even had a telephone back then. So he immediately went to the daycare. And he told me the daycare was flipping out because it's 7 o'clock and the pickup was at like 4 or something like that. And, so my dad embarked on being a single parent. And honestly, I didn't even see her until I was like 6 or 7. I think she basically ran off with like the landlord because he had more money and things she thought she wanted. And kids didn't fit in the picture with her. So I, it's just thinking back to it now, I can't imagine just leaving your kids and walking away from that. But I also think she struggled with more mental health and, this was 70s. You couldn't talk about feelings, and like it's a little bit
Yeah.
more prevalent now, but you couldn't talk about, I don't know if she suffered postpartum depression, if that was part of it, or if that's just who she was.
Right.
At that time, as an adult now, I knew she just didn't want the responsibility. She had 4 kids and barely raised one, growing up. So
Yeah.
my dad, he really had a hard time, taking care of 2 kids by himself. This was the 70s. You didn't hardly ever hear about single dads
Yeah.
raising 2 kids by themselves. And he didn't have much of an education. And so he basically quit the job that he had because he was going to get fired anyway. And we ended up going on welfare, and we were on welfare like my entire childhood. And I just think that him coping with my mom leaving and the 2 kids, he just turned to alcohol. Now, the strange thing is a lot of people think when they think somebody's an alcoholic, they think, oh, they drink every day but my dad pretty much drank on the weekends, sometimes during the week, but he would get really, really drunk. And when my dad drank, you never knew who you were going to get. If you got somebody emotional, if you got
Right.
somebody that was going to hit you, you didn't know
Ugh.
what that particular bottle was going to have in it. So, my mom leaving and we were poor, so we lived in an area where it was not very safe. There was a lot of violence and fights, and I used to get in fights. And it's just, I mean, he did what he could with
You
what
had to
he
defend
had. But
yourself. Yeah.
what's that?
But I said you had to defend yourself. I mean, you had to
Yeah,
learn,
oh yeah, oh yeah.
how to protect yourself because there was no one there to protect you. I mean,
No.
that makes total sense. Like we are born with these instincts, and I think it's God is preparing us, to be able to take care of ourselves in a situation, and that's what you had to learn, unfortunately, at a very young age. And your dad, as you said, addiction is not what people think of. Addiction is like you're drinking all the time, and that's what makes you an alcoholic, which obviously that is part of it, but it's really the pain, the resentment, the anger that is really, you can be, that's why they call them the dry drunk, right? Like you can not be drinking alcohol, but you can still be an addict because it truly is about, like you said, it wasn't that he drank every day. He drank on the weekends, but here he is dealing with, all the pain that he had felt
Yeah.
in a way that, unfortunately impacted you and your brother in a hard way.
Yeah, and I think now, growing up in a house that was like full of like bitterness and resentment and anger, I, I was talking to my husband about a situation we had saw online about some kid hitting another kid, and I was like, a lot of times kids see that, and that's, that anger is something they see, they think it's normal, and that's very reactive, or they're, for me. I didn't necessarily have a lot of anger. I just would have to defend myself. And I especially grew up in, my
Right.
dad's a dark Mexican, and I grew up in a predominantly Mexican and African American neighborhood, and I looked a little bit different. So I would get teased for kind of looking different. And, people would test me. And then after being there a while, everybody was just friends. And the things that he wanted us to witness was like not like normal parents. Like I would shelter my kids from a lot of stuff, and as they get older, they start hearing and seeing different things. And he had no filter. And so it wasn't it was rough, and I hid a lot of stuff and had a lot of secrets all the time, and to the point where I just felt like even at a young age, like you didn't talk about your feelings. And it was a very, I'm a Gen Xer, so it's a very suck it up buttercup generation. And I know now
Yeah.
as an adult, like, we
Yes.
don't want you to suck it up. And so for me, I felt like there was no other place to turn but to Jesus. And what's crazy is, even at a young age, my dad was raised Catholic, but he never went to church. Oh, I think he only went to church when he was really feeling guilty about the way he was living and acting. And we would go, like, maybe once or twice a year. But growing up in
Okay.
a house, and that really didn't have any kind of religious affiliation, I always felt a closest to the Lord. And I always felt like that was my mental safety place in my prayer. And I remember even telling my dad when I grew up I wanted to be a nun. And but I didn't have like those examples of somebody who went to church, somebody talked to me about the Lord. It wasn't until I got older, but I think that's knowing that I had Jesus to talk to at night, especially, was probably what kept me from doing, harming myself, to be quite frank with you. I just, there was just so much going on in that childhood and I just had one person to go to, my dad, and I wasn't allowed to go to. And um, as a mother of daughters, I know that even mothers that and daughters that kind of go through phases of going at each other because they're each going through growing pains. I still feel like I don't know where I would be without my daughters, and vice versa for them. And not having that as a kid, when I
Yeah.
look back to it, it makes me feel sorry for that kid version of me, of not having that mom around, or the dad that I
Right.
couldn't tell anything. And then also, like, was telling me to keep my mouth shut and not tell anybody things. And I would have the
Hey.
conversations before we
Mm.
would go to my grandmother's house, like, you fell down, or you don't say nothing, just keep your mouth shut, or when you get
Yeah.
home, you're going to get it worse,
Yeah.
so.
Obviously, the Lord has been pursuing you your whole life, and we'll get to that
Mhm.
moment for you when you accepted and were saved. But before we do, in the book, you mention that, again, this book is so good. Everybody should get it. It's called Life's Sad Story, God's Love Story. You mention the fact that your mom came and knocked on the door, and I think you said your dad told you to go upstairs and stay upstairs. But of course, she comes in, he has a conversation with her, and you kind of peek your head down. What was that moment like for you?
Yeah, and what's funny is I remember even prior to that, everybody else had moms or just a mom, and I didn't have one. And so sometimes I would ask my dad if we were going to public places, like, is that my mom? I had no idea what she even looked like. And so I remember getting that knock at the door, and my dad telling us to go upstairs. And, even though my dad was mean to us, we didn't listen, so I remember eventually tiptoeing down and peeking and seeing this woman sitting on the couch. And I was really young, and I could still in my head imagine what she looked like. That's how impactful that moment was, of seeing her for the first time. And I just remember her crying, and I didn't know who she was. I just knew she was crying. But I kind of like put two and two together when she said, they're my kids too. And then when she was crying, I think I don't know if I shared it in the book or talked about it, but I was just asking my dad why she was crying. And that's kind of when she looked up at me, and then yeah, she just, started crying more. And then my dad was really angry because she had left, and then she just wanted to show up and decide she wanted to be a mom. And, he'd been taking care of and doing everything. But
Yeah.
I just remember thinking she was so beautiful and she smelled good. I remember the way she felt, and I remember thinking to myself how pretty she was, like she was prettier than the other kids' moms. And, and then I had a mom, but, I remember wanting to go with her. But my dad's like, no. And, he had to get beside his, anger, and, finally, let us go see her and talk to her. And I remember crying when she left, because I wanted to spend time with her. But, and then pretty much from there on out, it wasn't like a normal arrangement. We would just see her when she decided she would want to see us. It wasn't my dad never trusted her because, most parents, if they get divorced, they work out an agreement and try to co-parent best they can in most cases, or they have something outlined. Like she would just either call a neighbor, because most of the time we didn't have a phone, or uh, decide when she wanted to see us. And so it was a really strange when she, but I also didn't care that she did that. I just wanted to see her any opportunity. We used to wait. We
Yeah.
could see the main road from my brother's bedroom, and we used to go and look out the windows, because we could see her car coming to our apartment complex. And there was many weeks that she said she was coming, and we would stand there for hours. And I know my dad probably was so heartbroken, because he was like, well, she's not coming, just come down. But we were just convinced that she was still coming, and we would be up there for hours waiting for her, 2-3 hours, just or go eat and then go back up and look in the window, and it's getting dark and she's not showing up. And yeah, so it was a weird relationship. I felt a need to want to be with her, but she was definitely like disappointing. Even as a little kid, it made me sad sometimes that she was like that I finally have a mom, and she's kind of screwed up. you know
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah. So from there, I felt like there was like maybe a very small part of your story that was kind of a little bit normal when she married Mel,
hmm
and he felt like your safe place.
yeah.
What was that time in your life like? How old were you, and what you felt like in your book? You say it felt like you were, maybe have somewhat normalcy because you had a safe person.
Yeah. And not having, like, my mom wasn't a safe person. I actually didn't really even know her. So it's like I didn't know too much about her. I just knew she was my mom, and I liked being with her because it was a break from my dad. And, my dad was, I swear, just growing up, like, he was always angry, and everybody gets upset, when you have kids, but he just took it every time to a next level. And so I just wanted to go somewhere where there was peace. And that was who she left my dad for. He was like the landlord of their apartments, and she got to talking to him. Of course, he's in his 50s and she's this young, cute girl. And, knowing him later, I'm still shocked that he got with her knowing that she left her kids, because he was such a good dad. And so, but yeah, Papa Mel, he was just such a big part of my childhood, because it was actually the first time that I felt like a parent child relationship that was safe with anybody. And just the way he
That's
treated me. Plus he had all
How old were
boys.
you?
I think I was probably about, I would say about 8 when I first met him. She was with him when she took off, or I don't know what she was doing in that time, but I know she was. It was probably a little bit after, so anywhere 7, 8 when I actually met him, because my mom would come visit and go see us, but we didn't actually meet him until later. But yeah, they. So I was still so young, but he was just the coolest, most animated guy that and he was really family oriented. These are the things that I remember from him. He's got 2 sons that, will say, oh yeah, he would get up our butts, and me and him, like, that's not the experience I had with Papa Mel. So I'm just going to keep the good stuff in my brain. But yeah, he was my safe
Yeah.
space. And I remember a few times wanting to tell him about my abuse, that I felt so like he would be the only person that would protect me. But I also felt like if my dad found out, that things would not be good for me. So I kept quiet. But I think a lot of times, when you have physical and emotional and everything abuse, and you as a kid, and you learn to keep it quiet, I don't think whoever you feel comfortable with, you don't. And I did tell Jesus all the time my relationship, about this hurt and why
Yeah.
this happened. And and I felt like talking to him was kind of getting me the courage, like probably God was putting it on my heart, but I was just a scaredy cat to tell him, because so I never did. I never told him or
Yeah.
anybody, and until obviously I was a little bit older, and going into foster care.
You were so young. I mean, it's like a parent or someone kidnapping a kid. I mean, you hear these stories of a kid being kidnapped, and the kid, like, and it's not even that far from their house, right? Like these stories I've watched before, and it's not even that far from their house, but the kidnapper says, if you tell anybody, then I'm going to kill your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the story for you, is like, you didn't know what was going to happen. And so you didn't want something to happen to you, or, whoever it may be. Like you were doing the only thing you knew to do. So there was nothing that you could have done besides the fact, because he told you so many times, say you fell when you really didn't, or whatever the case may have been, when you had a bruise, you were always having to cover for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the crazy part is my mom would notice a little bit. And, I found out some things about my mom after she had passed away that made me wonder why she didn't take my side more, or when she recognized abuse, that why she wasn't just immediately like, I'm going to take care of you, you're not going anywhere. Why she just didn't have that. Instead, she just was like, yeah, you're lying. And I'm like, really? But she was also the same one that would notice marks or how scared I was of my dad, and and the consequences. But it also even stemmed back to, like, being afraid of my dad when other people did things to me. I didn't want to tell him, thinking he was going to get mad at me, because that was literally half of our relationship. I felt like, my memories as a kid, he did some good things for me, and I know that he loved me, but I think that it was like a lot of anger, and that was kind of the relationship that we had, and that's who I saw my dad as.
Do you think that he saw your mom in you?
I think so. And I've been told that. My husband even mentioned that, maybe because you look so much like your mom, and he had so much bitterness harbored towards her, maybe he took it out on you. Maybe I don't. Yeah, I just think that he had to take his anger out on somebody, not that my brother didn't get in trouble, but I felt like I just got in the most trouble, and I was just treated so differently when I was a kid, that even growing up, it made me question, like, how you get treated differently. Like, even as an adult, I remember one time telling my brother he didn't understand what it was like growing up in the same house and being parented so differently. Like, he remembers the anger and all that other stuff, and, being hit all the time, but he remembers a lot of stuff. I'm like, yeah, because you didn't have that treatment. I had that treatment, so even now as a parent, I treat, obviously their ages, they get treated differently and have more freedoms, but and that's one thing as a parent I do now, because of my childhood, is it's like equal opportunity. We have kind of the same rules, the same treatment, my same availability, despite gender and, of the kids. But yeah, so it was, I think he did, however, so much emotion towards her that he just definitely took it out on me, like, numerous times, or he'll say, oh, it's just like your mom, but I didn't know, because I didn't even know her. So how do I know? You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're like,
how she acted.
You're like, how was that fair? I'm sorry. Yeah. You're the one that chose to be with her. So, I mean, like, it's not my fault. Okay. So you mentioned in your book that there was a woman. I can't remember. How did you get to start going to church, and what made you decide that that was something that you wanted to do?
So, like I had mentioned, like, I'd always had, like, a relationship with God, more God, like, I knew more God. Like, I say Jesus now because that's the relationship my faith is really close to Jesus when I think about the Lord or God. But back then it was God. I just thought just God. I didn't know anything about who Jesus was. And I remember there was this church that was coming around knocking on the doors, and I remember seeing them and, being nosy when they were getting ready to knock at my door. I thought, oh gosh, because my dad was mean. He was mean. He was mean until he passed away. He was, like, just nasty and mean to people, and I thought he's going to be mean. And so they basically just said, hey, we'd like to invite you, your family, and if you don't want to go, we have a bus that will come and pick up your kids, and we'll bring them. And then they'll get a snack and then we'll bring them back to you. And I thought my dad agreed to it, which shocked the heck out of me because he didn't let us really, we had to stay in the vicinity of where we were. And so I remember being like so excited the first week. Like we didn't have much. I had a couple Easter dresses, and back then dresses were really cool. Like in the 80s, everybody wore dresses. Like now my daughter wears leggings to church, but I remember shining my shoes and so excited to go to church. And I think I went a couple times, and they had like the girls group for the ages, and I was about 14 at the time. And I think I went to go use the bathroom or something, because when you went into the main sanctuary, the kids sat in this one area in the back, and then the adults sat in the front. And I remember it happening during every service. I don't know if they wanted to hear this one part, or if it was just some kind of, I don't know if it was worship, but anyway, part of the sermon. So anyway, I had to sit next to this lady, and I remember everything. Like I remember she was wearing this brown corduroy skirt and these boots, and I remember how she looked with their brown hair and her eyes. And so when the pastor was done, she just kind of put her hand on my shoulder and looked at me and just asked if I was like saved. And I was like, from what? Like I didn't have no comprehension. She's like, no, like, have Jesus in your heart. And I mean, I knew from Jesus, but I didn't realize like that there was like that process, because I had only spoken to really God. I was still learning. And so I said no. And she's like, would you like to? And I said, yeah, I would. And I remember like even now, like without trying to get emotional, just the way, like I felt like the Lord put this person in my life, because after that moment, pretty much most of my life, it was chaos. And if I didn't have that moment, everything would have been more broken than it is. So she prayed and explained about that Jesus will never leave me, forsake me, no matter how hard things get. And we said this prayer. I remember she given me a hug, and I just thought about that like the entire week, and I couldn't wait, because they gave us these little Bibles, and she told me like she wrote down a couple verses to read. And so I remember reading, and she was like, and I was thinking like, I'm going to try to memorize something, because I remember the other kids talking about memorizing verses. And so I could not wait to go see her. And so I go the next week, and I'm asking everybody where this lady was. And I said, I was trying to describe where she was sitting, and nobody in that church, nobody. Like I even went to the pastor, which I'd never even spoken to him. Nobody even knew who she was, could remember her. And it was a small church. It wasn't like a mega church. It was a very small church. They probably had under 40 people there. And so to this day, it's just a mystery. I mean, I feel like just God sent somebody to me for that moment,
yes,
to prepare me. And I say
yes,
that now, because as I am getting more mature and a little older, and especially the walk that I've been on with, I have seen God do things that he was preparing me for in strange forms, like, in different forms, sometimes people, sometimes events, sometimes dreams. And, but yeah, it's a mystery. Nobody knew who she was. I still think about her to this day, and I'm almost 52. And, I remember everything about that moment. She changed my life and gave me a gift that God sent, really.
It's the most important. Yeah, it's the most important gift that you're given, right? Like what she did that day. And I believe that we entertain angels every day. And I believe that she probably was an angel that was sent by God to come and talk to you that day. And that I believe with all my heart. I mean, especially based on the fact that you asked everyone. I mean, and this was a very specific way in which they were bringing kids to the church. And so someone would have at least known, especially somebody in that group would have known who she was, but no one knew who she was. So to me, that was God showing up in a big way. And what a miracle that is, and what a gift that was for you. And I know you mentioned that verse specifically, that God will never leave you nor forsake you. That verse, how is that? Like, how do you apply that, looking back at your life? all the things that you've walked through, even up to this point where you like, okay, God, so you were there, you're with me, even when I was dealing with all of this pain.
I always think about that verse in a sense, like I know that we have the verses that talk about the armor of God, but I feel like for me, that verse is my armor. Like that is my verse that even at times where I didn't feel God close or, nothing, I just feel like that verse has been like my promise, my anchor, my armor, my everything. So it was just strange because it could have been there's so many other beautiful verses that I could have been given, but I remember
Right.
thinking like that was like, what do you mean like leave you? Because I was always a thinker and I kind of creative even as a little kid. And I remember pondering, what does that mean leave you? Like, is he going to leave like my mom or is he, all these weird things. I was like,
Yes.
as I processed and chewed that verse up, but so many times when I go back and I'm just like, man, that is just so wild how good God is. Like, even in the midst of terrible stuff, like I know like never leave you, forsake you, and it's just like I always have to think that.
And that she used that verse. I mean, again, there's so many verses that she could have chosen to like explain what being saved is, right? Like if you walk somebody through the acceptance of Christ, there's several different ways you can do it, as far as obviously the main things you have to keep the same, but again, scriptures and things that you would use. And she chose that one specifically, like it was designed on purpose for you specifically, because obviously your story, you have your mom left when you were 2 years old. And then as you continue to go through the story, the different times that you have been left and been disappointed in your life, that God is always there. He is still consistent to this day in your life. But I definitely think that that's such a powerful, pivotal moment. And, that was when you were 14. And then at 15, you were put into foster care. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I was still 14, like turning 15. I want to say it was like right at the end of the school year, and I would have been turning 15. But, I had a situation where, my dad was very like overbearing. And I felt like as I was getting older, he was getting more strange. Like, okay, you can go on the porch with your book. Like he didn't really want me starting to go outside and play and do things where I could go talk to other people. He was just very strict and overbearing. And, I just wanted to go hang out with some friends. And I knew that if I did this one particular day, because I had missed the bus one other time, and this one time my friends were going, I don't know, I say they were going to an event or going to eat. I think I know we went to a couple places, but long story short is I decided to go hang out with my friends. So I missed the bus and I went home with my friends. And my friend's boyfriend had a car. And so when we were done doing whatever, I said, drop me off. He dropped her off first, and then he dropped me off. And I said, drop me off here, because if my dad sees you, he's going to get really pissed off. And but my dad and my brother were out looking for me, and my dad just lost it. He grabbed that kid and pushed me and was screaming at me, which got like all the neighbors' attention. And the kid, I think I want to say that maybe his parent or he wanted to like tell on my dad. And so I think it was through the school officer that they said, because they didn't know where we lived or anything. They just knew who the student was, because he just dropped me off. So he didn't know exactly where I lived. So I think that's how it ended up getting to the school officer. And so he came in and questioned me about what happened. And I didn't know, because I just always lived kind of scared of my dad. I didn't know you were not supposed to be scared of your parent. And I think he just felt my anxiety. And I think he gave me one particular look that was like so much sympathy. Like he just felt really bad for me, because I think he knew I was hiding something, or how scared I was. Because I remember him saying, you're not supposed to be this scared of your parents. You know that, right? And I'm like, I didn't know that, because I was always scared. And I just sung like a canary and told him everything. Told him about my dad dealing, my, all abuse by him, physically abuse, sexually by other men, going back to even when I was a little kid, and just all the things that had happened. And I just trauma dumped on this school officer. And so he just said, he ended up calling CPS, and she came, and I remember, now as an adult, I think about, like, I don't know why I remember people's expressions when they had looked at me. That's like weird memories that I carry with me, because I think that was a little trauma response, because I could tell by my dad's facial expression when he was getting ready to explode, or even my mom's face when I knew she was lying about something. And so anyway, so the CPS came and they basically put me in an emergency foster home that night. And a lot of people will ask me, well, how come your brother wasn't put in? And it's like, well, of course they were like, she's lying, and my brother's like, my dad doesn't do any of that. Like, he just yells sometimes, like, covering, because they were like peas in a pod. I mean, they grew up more like friends than my dad treated him like he was his buddy more than his son. And they just had this, even before he passed away, they just had this weird relationship. Like, they would even yell at each other. Like, you would never guess their relationship was strange, but it was different, I guess, than mine. And so, um, but the caseworker was like, I know better. So she was like, I'm just going to get you out of there. So I ended up going to an emergency foster home that night. And a lot of people asked me, like, what were you thinking? Were you scared? And I was like, I really wasn't scared to be in a stranger's house. I was more scared of my dad knowing that I told somebody what was going on and that he was going to come find me. I was more scared of that night, laying in bed. And I remember even thinking I saw shadows when the trees would move outside. I was just having it so much anxiety. Like, I didn't sleep the whole night. And so yeah, I was placed in a foster care. I remember the social worker at one point said, I'm going to go see if I can get some of your stuff. And he basically told her to F off, and he wasn't going to give her anything. And, and then it's weird, because a few months prior to that, my mom was going to try to keep me because she just knew my dad was out of hand. But my dad convinced her. He, like, talked to her before they talked to him, and made it like, oh, we've been having problems. And and it's to cover his own self, and I remember
Right.
growing up and having this conversation with my dad as an adult about just everything. And I said, it was just more important for you that everybody believed you and thought you were okay person, and you were fine with everybody persecuting me, even though you knew the truth, and it started with
Right.
all that, and so yeah, I was in and out of a few foster homes. And actually, at one point I was put in a mental home because they had no foster homes. And
Oh my
so
goodness. Really?
yeah, yeah. And so they put me and one because I didn't like one of the foster moms. Well, I liked her. She just made me call her mom. And I was really messed up then, like, going into foster care. And I just basically said, you got to get me out of here, or I'm going to do something to myself. But I didn't mean it. I just wanted to get out of there, but they took it like, she's going to do something to herself. And so they put me in a mental facility.
She wanted you to call her mom? She
She
wanted you to
wanted me
call
to
her
call her
mom?
mom. Yeah, it was, yeah. And it's like, it was weird.
That's weird.
I don't know why they didn't catch that, because it wasn't like, oh, we have a good relationship, would you feel comfortable calling me mom? No, it was like, I'm mom, this is dad, and you're going to call us mom and dad. And I'm like, but you're not my mom and dad. And they're like, well, there's not other homes,
Oh
so
my
you either
gosh.
basically call us mom. And then, but what's crazy is, outside of that, super nice. But I was just like, that was such a weird thing to give, like, traumatized kids coming into your home, And for me, mom especially was extremely triggering, So yeah, so they put me in a mental
Yes. Oh
home,
my
and I
goodness.
ended up getting essayed by a counselor while I was in there, and it, and,
Are
and
you
I just
serious?
remember. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I share it, I think, in my book a little
Wow.
bit about how, I just wanted, growing up, when you don't get love from your parents, you start looking for love and attention. And pretty much at that point, anybody that gave me attention, I took it. And here was this grown adult that was doing things, and um, but it made me really uncomfortable. Like, I liked the attention, but I didn't want him touching me. But he kept touching me because he was, a predator. And one day he
Oh
was
my
in my
goodness.
room, and things were going on, and another counselor happened to walk in, and she caught him. And
Oh my
but
gosh.
they started. It was strange though, because they got rid of him right away and did whatever. And I don't even remember them asking me anything. I'm sorry that happened to you. That was not appropriate. They were all worried about them losing their jobs or something happening. So then again, here I am in a place that's supposed to protect me, and my mental health is more focused on it getting out that a counselor had abused a kid there. And so they even
Oh
there
my
was one time.
goodness.
What's funny is that, I mean, I went through so much, but if when I think about that moment, that kind of almost hurts me more than things that I had gone through, because I was at my breaking point that I knew nobody cared about me. Like, my own parents don't care about me. The
Right.
foster care people don't care about me. Now I'm in this facility, nobody cares about me. And I had so much anger at that point. And they were like, oh, we have group counseling, you got to go. And I'm like, I'm not going. I'm like, you guys don't care about me. I think I was already 15 at this point, and I refused to go. So, kind of like you see in the movies where there's people showing up in the white coats, and four guys show up and they grab me, and I put up a fight. And at one point they dropped me, and I had a bloody nose and a black eye. And then they ended up strapping me to the quiet room. And um, I don't. I still don't remember how long I was in there. I eventually they let me out, and one of the counselors says your social worker's on the phone, and I'm like, oh gosh, great, now I'm in trouble. And she was a little shocked by my behavior, because even though I had all that stuff, like, I was just not a rule breaker, because I was just kind of like, I just didn't want to break rules. If somebody told me not to do something, I didn't do it, in foster care and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But she was calling to let me know that there was a potential foster mom that wanted to meet me, because I told her, after this lady, I want to meet the foster parent. I don't want you just to put me anywhere. And I said, if that means I age out of this mental house, then I'll do it. But she ended up finding somebody, and that's where Elsa showed up in my life. And um, she was kind of the one parent figure besides Mel that I had. She ended up eventually getting guardianship of me, and that poor woman dealt with so much of my resentment and anger, but she still loved me. And um,
Mm.
so she went through everything. She went through all the court dates and everything I had to go through, my parents, all my emotions, and being a teenager.
Oh my goodness. But again, that was kind of one of those God moments for you of like someone coming to your, like you had
Yeah.
very few of these, but
Yeah.
the corduroy skirt, and now you have this woman
Yeah.
who
The
is going to
timing.
fight for you, and
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
timing
God's
of it.
timing. Yeah. God's timing is, it's definitely, like, as we know as believers, it's never in our timing. Like, we think something's going to happen a certain way, and
No.
it doesn't. And so, I thought eventually, like, I would be healed of, like, my trauma as I grew up. And, I did go to counseling when I was in foster care. So I thought I'm fine now. I went through counseling. But my trauma came out in ways. I would sleep with people I wasn't supposed to be doing. And then I had a rocky road. Not Jesus did never had it. He was always there. It was me. There's that saying that says, when Jesus feels far away, guess who walked away. Guess who
Who's
moved.
moved?
And
Yeah,
yeah, I guess
right.
who moved. And
Yeah.
so I would go. I'd be really strong in my walk, and then I just had all these underlying issues that I never resolved. And I had to work through them, and work through bad decision making, and to get to where I was. And So finally, after healing, and the only thing, like when my mom passed away, there was so much forgiveness. I told her I forgive her for everything, and she accepted it. And my mom was an atheist growing up, and I remember buying her this little pink Bible because she was a little extra, and I thought, oh, she liked this pink Bible. Maybe I'll offer her a pink Bible and see if I could pray with her. And I remember getting my daughter ready and thinking, like, this is the day when I go over there, I'm going to make sure she's saved before she dies, because even in your final moments, but unfortunately she had passed away
Yeah, you have a
before
chance.
no, I didn't. But I felt like I have peace knowing she accepted my Bible. And I did ask her, have you made your peace with God? But I really wanted to do what Corduroy Skirt did and really kind of pray that prayer of accepting Jesus in their heart, not just saying, yeah, I made my peace with God because it's my end and I don't know. But I didn't get to I didn't get to do that. But like I said, I feel that peace knowing that, we had a little conversation and that she accepted my Bible as an atheist. And so for me,
Yeah.
it's
I
weird
I
because, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that, that there was definite intercession. I'm assuming that you had obviously prayed for her, and, it's amazing what God does in those moments. So obviously you don't know for sure, but I think that peace that you feel is probably just knowing that, that she did accept before she took her last breath.
Yeah, I feel like she has. And, in that, I talk about our kind of final moments before she passed away. And man, I felt God there so much. Like I even had this vision that God put on my heart, because I remember looking at her and we had become really close at this point. And I'm like, wow, it's kind of like the movie people like good thing happen and they get married and then somebody gets hit by a train or something. You're like, oh, and I kind of felt like that. My mom and I were such in a good place. And then here she is diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I remember we were sitting on our back swing and I just started getting real emotional. I just said, man, isn't that crazy that God's taking you, but he's given me a daughter. I'm like he's given me something that's going to not take away what I'm going to feel when you're gone, Mom, but he's given me something that's going to take my mind off of it, another source of love. And I just, all of a sudden, God put like these visions in my head of all these moments in my life that God had protected me. And I realized at that moment talking to my mom, because even she accepted that thought, she's like, yeah, that's crazy. And we just got quiet. Like we were pondering on that thought of Jesus showing up and being there for us, even when we don't recognize it, and so I was able to have that peace. We got kittens, so you might hear that in the background. But I was able to have that peace. So that's how I left my mom in a state of grace and redemption and forgiveness. And even sometimes now, I still held 20 something year old me harbored bitterness more than 50 year old me. And sometimes I wish, like, man, I wish I would have gave her more grace, and I wish I'd have did this, but God gave me and gave her and I exactly what we needed, and that
Yeah.
that's how I talked myself out of getting so emotional when I got to the part of writing about my mom in my book.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's such a bond between, mothers and daughters and sons and fathers and vice versa, the importance of those relationships of that we have right here on earth. But obviously the most important relationship is with the Father in heaven, who will never leave us nor forsake us. But, I can't even, imagine all of the work that maybe it was in a moment, but the work that you've had to do to, work through all of the pain that you have faced and the resentments that you could be holding onto because of your story. So are you still in that process? I mean, again, you've been through so many different challenges. How do you, like, for people that are listening, like, that have gone through maybe half of what you've gone through, right? How do you work through that, and how do you forgive and let go so that it doesn't, hurt you, kill you?
One thing I do, and this is like a strange, and I don't know why I think about this. Like, I think about when I want to forgive people or let go, I think about the worse I was in my life, my behavior, my thought processes, my actions, everything that I did against God when I was angry at Him, no matter, angry for putting me in situations, having the parents that I have, seeing the things that I saw. I think about that, and even in my darkest, He forgave me. I was forgivable. Somebody that did, like, everybody thinks like now, oh, like, what did you do exactly? I did lots of things. I was a stripper for a little while because I got mad at him for having this really heavy miscarriage. So I thought, this is going to get mad at him. And then God really spoke to me and was like, what are you doing here? And so
Yeah.
I wasn't there long, but that was just a part of. So I think back, I did things that are very worldly, very sinful, and He forgave me. Everybody deserves forgiveness, and a lot of
Right.
things that I had my parents did to me, like the world would be like, yeah, I'd never talk to them. I don't want to forgive them. I'm like, I have to forgive them. That's part of having that
Right.
relationship, because the only reason why I have a relationship with Jesus is because He forgave me. If He didn't forgive me or forgive
Right.
us, we wouldn't have that kind of relationship, with Him. It would be, we could keep
Right.
uh, abusing grace. We could be, still, doing. I had to have a conversation about, my daughter goes to this youth group and she's a kid, and they lie about the dumbest stuff. I go, that's not even worth lying about. I said, you don't want to get down a pattern where you lie. When you want to grow in your walk, you have to forgive other people and do what's right, even when nobody's looking, because, you might not think I'm seeing what you're doing, or dad sees what you're doing, but the Lord sees what you're doing. And in a
Yes.
world that is so me focused, and I'm going to do what I want Monday through Saturday and go to church and then back to whatever, I'm like, that's a loop of a strain in a relationship where maybe you're not even accepting that you're forgiven. I always say people that just keep doing the same thing, I don't think they've even accepted this gift that He's given us, that He put on the cross for us.
Right.
And some of it is like, you got to make a choice. None of us are perfect. I mean, nobody. I mean, even at where I thought I was the holiest of holies, reading my Bible, didn't do certain things, I still wasn't perfect, in my and but it's just it's I feel like it's just a path that you have to, like, change your life because He changed your life, is really kind of where I'm going at, and that
Yeah.
comes with learning to forgive others.
Yeah.
And I also felt like forgiving them, I thought, and I share this in my book, that I thought holding on to this, like, rock of bitterness and all that, or um, you know, and not giving that forgiveness, like, it's hurting them. But it wasn't. It was hurting me. It wasn't hurting them, because they
Right.
obviously didn't
Right.
have the same kind of relationship with the Lord, or the same conscience. So they didn't care. I didn't talk to them. Like, I remember I
Right.
not going a long period without talking to my dad. And, I'm sure he thought about me, but he went on with his life. It wasn't bothering him this much, but I had to forgive
Right.
him so I can let go of that. And that's really freeing. I mean, do you still remember things? People think, like, because you forgive, like, it's chalkboard, everything's erased. Yeah, it's a race, but you could still see what was written there, if that makes sense, or if
Right.
you dig too hard with the pencil, you can
Yeah.
kind of see, like, oh, that says my name right there, even though it was erased. So, I mean, forgiveness is just letting go, because, I've been forgiven. So I have to put that perspective. Thankfully, I have, like, a wonderful husband and family that, I don't have to sit around and be like, have that forgiveness towards them. It's just a teaching, but it's nice to know that I am so quick to forgive. And I think I think that's a bigger strength than people think it is. They'll think, oh, you're forgiving because, it's a
Yeah.
weakness. I'm like, man, no, forgiving somebody, that's like a strength that's bigger than anybody can think of.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. Forgiveness is definitely something that is a gift. If you have the ability to forgive people quickly, then it frees you from that pain and resentment. And, there's so many scriptures in the Bible where it talks about let go and let God, like we don't have to, necessarily always fight our battles. Like God definitely fights our battles for us. And when we leave room for him. And so, he has had so many redeeming moments for you. And I know that's part of like God's love story and him pursuing you, right? Like throughout your life, even, you could probably look back, you're 52, you can look back and see all the moments that where he was weaving in, and possibly, you've probably heard of that poem where, it's the, Jesus, you only see one set of footprints and you're like, where were you during this time? And God's like, I was carrying you. That's why you see one set, you know? And so like, that's such a beautiful description of God and how he works in and through our tragedies that we go through, or the challenges that we go through. But you also, obviously you went through foster care. You finally get Elsa, who is the person that, gets your guardianship and becomes a solid person for you, the person that's going to help you through this time of your life where you needed someone to fight for you. From there, you go into the military. And so tell us a little bit about that. What made you decide to go into the military?
I think I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I didn't have, I had Elsa, but, I just felt like I'm an adult now. I need to go move on. And I had a friend that joined the military, and I didn't know if I wanted to commit. So I ended up going into the reserves. And so, but the military time was actually my middle son who plans on going to the Navy, and my husband was in the Navy and I was in the Army. So we have a big Army Navy rivalry in our house, but he's going to the Navy, and we both tell him like, man, that time of our life, it was so hard going through boot camp, but it was like the best memories of my life. And I was like finally like around, just being around people that you had to learn to trust. That's like one of the biggest things they do is they break you down. So you are going to listen to them, and you have earned that much trust that what they say to you, you're going to trust that decision. And same with, your platoon and your squad and everything. And so that was really good for me. And it was really good to start learning to like, trust people, because I've always been like a super untrusting person. Like, I don't trust you, and then until you give me a reason otherwise. Now I've sort of twisted it, because I don't think God wants us to live that way. He wants us to be cautious. Now I live like, I will give you some trust until you give me a reason. So I've kind of reversed it a little bit, because I feel like the people that I didn't trust or were suspicious, it wasn't even them doing anything. It's just my own trauma being like very guarded about stuff. And so it was a great time of my life. And, then I went on to, become a mom, and that really changed.
Yes.
That even changed my relationship with the Lord, because I'm a deep thinker, but just to think that, even cells come together and here's this human being, and I thought, finally I'm gonna love something the way that I felt like I want it to be loved. And so, and then I had two kids, not the way that God wanted me to. I got married after the fact, and I share that in my book. And there was a period of time that even in my church that I think I did things because I was still working on my trauma. Not that it makes an excuse, but it's like I realized, even though I loved my children, the situation I put myself in by doing, being with someone premaritally, God makes rules for a reason. It's not to like make life miserable. It's because he knows the consequences of the chain reaction of what's going to come out of that sin. And so I definitely struggled becoming a single parent because I didn't do the things that God wants us to do. So now I'm kind of, I didn't say he didn't make me suffer, but those actions have suffering. And so I had a hard
Yeah.
time, but I went to school and, during that time, got a degree and, just wanted to provide better. And I left California because it just was so expensive, and I ended up moving to Ohio. And I remember thinking like, oh man, if I when I come to Ohio, I'm gonna meet one of those like Midwest guys, like big burly bearded guys that go like hunting and stuff, and what you see out, and a lot of blue collar workers. And then I ended up with this guy that's like a little shorter than me and like really skinny, and but God was like, yeah, that sounds nice. I have someone else for you, and so we loved each other before we met. At the time, he had custody of his two kids because his ex had addiction issues. And, he was pretty frank with me. Like, he was always a provider. He's a crane operator. And so work, 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 work. And she took care of the kids, but she was going deeper into her addiction. And he was trying to save his family, and it just didn't work out. But unfortunately, she just, once they ended, the addiction got even worse. And so we got married, and blended family life was going great. And then a couple years into our marriage, we get a phone call from the ex-wife's sister that the ex-wife's in the hospital, and she had COVID really bad, and she was still using. And then they're like, oh, and then she's 33 weeks pregnant, and I think they're going to induce her. I already knew from being in foster care and knowing, she had her rights terminated too because of the addiction, and I just assumed that child was going to end up in foster care. So I remember telling my husband, if it comes down to it, like we'll take him. And I said it out loud, but in my mind though, I just said it. I didn't even think about it. It just came out of my mouth, and I'm like, oh, that's crazy. But going back just a teeny bit, and I share this in my book, is we had a little Bible study we started with our neighbors. And I was like, let's see, 50. I was like 47 or something when Levi was born. And our neighbors were all like going through fertility. They were younger than us, and they were going through fertility treatments. And so every week we would pray for their fertility or, their treatments. And then my husband just blurted, yeah, we're going to try for a baby of our own. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm kind of like older, I was like, that's crazy. So
Yeah.
I was like, if that's what God wants. So I decided to kind of pray on it. So then I started having these dreams. And so I'm thinking like I'm really praying about it, and like now I'm dreaming, and I was dreaming about this baby for like a couple months. I even shared it with our group. I keep dreaming about this baby, and he's got like blonde hair and blue eyes, and some dreams he's
Oh
like a
my
little
God.
baby, and sometimes he's a little toddler, and we're walking and he's holding hands. So then the joke was like, yeah, I'm going to probably be the one that's going to be ended up getting pregnant, and not them, the older one. And but
Yeah.
that was God really preparing me for Levi. I swear on that. Like, you get snarky comments of like, well, God took the mom and, all this. And it's like, well, God didn't, addiction did, and a lot of people misconception
Right.
that.
Right.
And but I feel like God was preparing me because if it wasn't for that time or those dreams or even the thought of a baby, or even going to foster care, any of those tenderness that I needed to go into this situation was probably not as strong as they would have been had I not had that God putting
Right.
this baby on my heart. So she ended up passing away a few days after she had her baby. And so then we talked to CPS, and they were like, yeah, that's fine. If we don't think other families going to come forward, because unfortunately they had been through this with them before. And of course you always want reunification, but yeah, so they kept
Yes.
talking about licensing, and I had no idea what it meant, but it meant becoming foster parents. And I remember when they told me, like inside, I like freaked out, and that little girl in me came out, and I was like, I just was riddled with
Oh,
anxiety. But at the same time, I was like, even though I said I'm not going to go back, like once I met him, I was like going to do whatever they told me to do. So he was born in Texas. We were in Ohio, and the process to move him was going to take so long. And so we ended up selling our home and we moved. And I found that time not only that was part of the reason I called my book, because it wasn't just a love story of God, me revisiting my trauma, but this time with a stronger walk with the Lord, and also using my brokenness to be strength for other people, other children that had just lost their mom, and this new baby that had nobody, and was going to use this broken person that had experienced this and wouldn't want something like that happen to them. So we became foster parents, and I just remember seeing him in the NICU, and I fell in love with him. And so it wasn't just a love story with the Lord and I, it was this love story for this little boy and I. And because, even though my husband loved, he fell in love with him too, and everybody did, I felt like for him and I was a former foster kid, and he was technically in foster care. And that
Yeah.
was a long process. It was like an 18-month or 18-month process. And
That's not an easy process. So can you explain what you have to do, first of all, just to pick up, move your family, which at the time you have 4 kids, move them to Texas, uproot them for this little boy, Levi, and then go through the process of, becoming a foster parent, which I think is, again, part of God's story for you, because you were in foster care as well. But explain that process.
Yeah, so at first we thought, when they called us and said, yes, we could do some kind of placement with you, we'll talk to Ohio and we'll get somebody to go there. And I thought they just check our house, make sure we're not crazy, and, have money. And, I didn't know. I knew what foster kid was like. I didn't know what foster parent was like. So they were like, yeah, no, actually it's going to take a long process. So if you're here. So I had actually already been in Texas with Levi because he was getting ready to get released. So they released him with me and the aunt. Even though I was taking care of him, they had to put some other family member, because technically I wasn't a kinship, to him. I was just married to her ex-husband. And so I was there. So that was a blessing, because I didn't have to pack a single thing in the house. And my husband had to pack up like the entire house. And it almost felt like a little vacation having a single newborn versus like 4 other kids. So I was there. I was there, but it was a strange situation. I am staying with my husband's ex-wife's sister with my husband's ex-wife's baby in another state. But God wanted me there because I got to show them love and grace. And I was very, I'm a servant kind of person. I love doing things for people, and especially with like cleaning and cooking and kind of, so I was cleaning and cooking. And, when she was deep into her grief for losing her sister, and it ended up where we got close. And we eventually moved and we got our own house, and you have to go through like classes there. I felt like the classes were never ending. You have to go through fingerprints 2 or 3 times. I think when my one son turned 14, he had to do it. All the specific things you got to get, fire extinguisher, certain stuff you have to get for your house. And I remember thinking like, gosh, that's why there's not enough foster parents. This is such a long, tedious process. We want the kids saved, especially being a former foster kid coming from a traumatic house too. Like, we hear the stories, but I think that, the system's broken. I think the process could be a little bit easier, like maybe sending them to like a 2-day thing through like, versus like felt like just multiple things. And we had to do TB testing and then court dates. And then every time I took them to the doctor, it was like an 8-page paper I had to take with me to get signed by them and signed by me. And all those details made me feel like I know the system's there to help people, but I also felt like there was so much paperwork and all these things we had to do that it was like, well, there's kids here too, like there's some things I can't do. I have kids I got to take care of, and but yeah, so we went through that process, and during that time, I'm just revisiting my own stuff. Especially, I had to do a 4-hour interview. They come and do interviews when you're getting licensed. Mine was like 4 hours. And I remember like just praying, God, just keep me calm, because I could feel my hands all sweaty, because I thought the minute I tell them why I was in foster care and I was a foster kid, thinking they're gonna tell me that, like, you're crazy or something, and we don't, or if I tell them my background, it's gonna work against me. That was also part of my anxiety, not so much in revisiting, just not like being judged, and because I didn't have like a good background childhood.
Again, feeling like you were not good enough, like you weren't like going
Exactly.
to be chosen.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And then, yeah, but then they were like, no, you're like the perfect candidate because it's relatable for you, and all these other things. And I was like, okay, all right, is this part over? And
Well, that
so
was healing. And
so we get done, and finally, after everything's said and done, we were in front of a judge saying goodbye to foster care. And I felt like for me, that wasn't just Levi saying goodbye to foster care. It was like me saying goodbye to foster care that day too. And I remember just in my heart, like thinking about that little girl that was in foster care, like being able to move on now that we're saying goodbye. And I go back to, like, referencing it. It's like that love story that I've created with God, and now there's this love story between this little boy and me. That I was a very unlikely person to be put in his life. Like, a couple years before that, I didn't even know who his mom was or his siblings or anybody. Um, so we said goodbye, and now he's almost 5, and the boss of all of us, basically.
wow, I'm just blown away again how your story has unfolded, and the fact that you have gone through so many challenges, more than most, and yet you have created this story with the Lord and how He pursued you in and through it throughout your journey. So, who named him Levi?
I actually named him Levi. I said that if it was a boy, I wanted to name Levi. And if mom had given a name before she passed away, we would have honored that. We would have kept that as his name and not changed it, because he was actually born with my husband's last name, because when she went in the hospital, she unfortunately had a lot of stuff with the law and had aliases, but she never used his last name when they were married, or even when she was doing, not so legal friendly stuff. She didn't use that last name as an alias, but this time when she went in, she gave that last name for some reason. So his last name has been Werts since he was born. And so I don't know if they inundated her and she gave, they did a C-section. Nobody still knows to this day. Like, it says natural birth, but nobody, like, how, but she was inundated. How did she not tell anybody this is what I want to name him, or any of this stuff that happened? So I think she was inundated and probably had a C-section. And I don't know if she ever got to see him. I would hope that she did, but we don't know, because she was inundated because her oxygen dropped to like 30 something, and then unfortunately she ended up having a stroke. So whatever she would have named, I would have named him. But I wanted to name my other son Levi, but I ended up going with another name, because I remember years ago a girl at church had a son named Levi, and I was like, man, if I ever have a boy, that's such a cool name. But I changed with my other son name. I went with Vance, but I was like, okay, next, if I ever have another boy again. So we went with Levi on his name, and I feel like he's such a
I
Levi.
love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think that, again, this is such a beautiful story, again, of the redemption. Did you know that Levi means united?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unity. Yep. It's funny because I was like, when I thought about the name, I looked it up, and I was like, how funny, because he really was uniting like our family together, the siblings together. And, um, so yeah, I thought how appropriate and how God put that name off and put a different name on my heart, and then had that name because he already had a Levi in mind for me, and so yeah,
That's right.
it's been really neat. It's really fun. I feel like I love this young age of like my other kids, because I was telling my older daughter, who's going to be 13 now, like everything's uncool and they don't start wanting to talk to us as much.
Right.
And I feel like this is the cool age where they want to, like, any chance they want to hang out with you, they'll do it. And my other teenage son, it's just a text
Yes.
message for money or something like that. And,
Yeah.
we're as close as we could be with teenagers. It's like I think even I
Right.
didn't realize, I thought, oh, when I grow up, my kids are going to always want to hang out with me. Like, I'm going to love them so much. And then I'm like, it was like that till they turned teenagers. And then I was like, wait a minute. But yeah, he's at the fun age.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny though, having a toddler when you're going through menopause. I'm not gonna lie about that. I'm always tired, and I'm like, God, I'm like, maybe that's why God cut us off, because this is exhausting. Like, by the time, like, we're asleep before he is. And but yeah, he's so
Right.
much fun.
Right.
And we're starting to have the conversations about his mom, and there's pictures of her in all the kids' room, and I still say your mom to them. And no matter what, like, Dakota doesn't really remember her, Austin does a little bit, but I want to, yeah,
Honor
we'll have
her.
those conversations. And I'm definitely not going to hide anything. Obviously, I wrote a book and it's out there. But yeah, he's awesome. And he's honestly brought us so much closer, like, together. He's my oldest daughter. That's like, that's her baby. She loves him, and he could do no wrong. And but yeah, we all, and everybody's dynamic with him is a little different. Each kid, how they, him and Dakota spend so much time together. It's kind of like they bicker, more than the
Yeah.
other two boys. So, and I didn't expect it, because he's only 4 and she's 12, and I'm like, wow, they were always like, he always wanted to be with her. And now he's like, I don't want to eat dinner, she's sitting here. I'm like, Levi, be nice. And and then the next minute, can Dakota, I want to play. And then you'll see him playing outside. And so I'm just happy to know
Oh.
that they never have to wonder where he is. And if that meant me revisiting my own trauma, it was worth it. And nobody was there for me, but being able to be there for other people is, I think, more healing to me than anything ever. So
Yes.
yeah, it's really
Yes.
neat. And it's a love
That.
story. It's a love story with this little boy, and what it took us to get here, what it took me to get here. And and how God just has bigger things that we don't. I mean, his plan is so neat. It's like, I love that he says no, and I love that he says, I got something else for you. And um I don't know what he's got for me next, but I'll take whatever, because he's never let me down. So
He's never left you nor forsake you.
he you never left me or forsake me. Yep. I always say too, he's never let me down, he's not gonna now.
Well, Christie, this book, honestly, I had a really hard time putting down. I wrote notes. I, read this front to back. You definitely have been through so many challenges in your life, but God has never left you nor forsake you. He's, made this beautiful tapestry of your story, and now you have it for people to read front to back, and I highly, highly recommend it. It's called Life's Sad Story, God's Love Story. Is there anything that you would like to share about this book that, maybe we haven't talked about, and I can grab a hold of this book?
Yeah, no, thank you. That book is available on Amazon, pretty much anywhere. It's also available on Kindle. I'm on social media. So if you look up Christie Werts, I always have my link. Once I wrote my book, obviously there's money that goes into the book, but pretty much now at this point, every time somebody buys a book, 100% of the profits go to one of the local charities here in Williams County in Ohio. One of my favorite things about this charity is they help kids that age out of foster care. And I was a kid who aged out, that had no resources. I share that in my book, that once you're 18, you are in no longer need of child protective service because you're an adult. But they have so many options for kids that age out, and I love that, and I love that they're putting in more programs because, some kids go into foster care really young, and some go in as teenagers, and some kids have really great support systems in foster care and some don't. And I love that foundations like this that I use, that they do help kids, and they have programs, they have different extensions, different ways to find them housing, education, help them fill out paperwork to do all that. And starting, I think in the next few weeks, I'm actually going to be volunteering with them kind of on a monthly basis. Sometimes it could be helping with the other kids or helping their storage or, events that they have. But I'm excited to, know that it's Levi and I giving back to other kids that maybe didn't have the opportunity that he had or the support that he had. And so I'm really excited, and I really hope that anybody gets the book, enjoys it. And I appreciate that for sure.
I can't wait for everyone to hear your story, whether it's through the book or through the episode. They get some snippets, but you have a beautiful love story, and I'm so thankful for your time today.